This is what Kazakhstan says its newest city will look like. Iconic towers, air taxis, artificial intelligence running city services. Target investment, $20 billion. Target completion, 2050. Right now it's a cluster of villages. Not all of them have running water. The government building has an outdoor toilet. Kazakhstan just passed a constitutional law giving special status to Alatau, a planned megacity designed to anchor Kazakhstan's position on the Middle Corridor, the trade route linking China to Europe that bypasses Russia entirely. If it works, Alatau becomes a signal that Central Asia can build its own economic future. If it fails, it joins a long list of ghost cities that promised everything and delivered nothing. I'm Bruce Panner. I spent 4 decades covering the former Soviet Union. This is the Turan Research Center, hosted by the Yorktown Institute, where we break down the geopolitics of Turkey, Iran, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. If you're new here and want more analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's get into it. Alatau is being built on the site of the village of Zhetigen, roughly 50 kilometers north of Almaty, Kazakhstan's commercial capital and largest city. The planned footprint is 88,000 hectares. For context, that's larger than both Singapore and Seoul. The city is divided into 4 districts. Gate, the business and financial center with an airport and rail junctions. Golden, a hub for healthcare, technology, and education with capacity for 40,000 university students.
Предварительные договоренности у инвесторов, кто готов здесь инвестировать свои деньги, есть предварительные договоренности с очень известными университетами международного уровня, очень высокого, которые на этих площадках хотят разместить.
Growing, the industrial and logistics zone oriented toward export. And Green, a recreational and tourism district on the shores of Kapchagai Lake. On March 20th, 2026, details of the project were presented to a joint session of Kazakhstan's parliament, where lawmakers approved the first reading of a constitutional law granting Alatau special status. That law creates something unprecedented in Kazakhstan. A city governed partly by a state fund, the Alatau City Authority, overseen by a council chaired by the Prime Minister. The authority's decision will carry the force of law within the city's territory. It's a governance model designed to bypass bureaucratic inertia that stalled development projects across Kazakhstan for decades.
Alatau City, new Eurasian haven. Alatau City, a new city in Kazakhstan.
Here's what makes this more than a vanity project. Alatau sits directly on the Middle Corridor, the east-west trade route that connects Europe to China through Central Asia without crossing Russian territory. That route runs through the Caspian, through Azerbaijan and Georgia, and into Turkey and European markets. Kazakhstan's position on that corridor is its single most valuable geopolitical asset outside of oil and minerals. And Alatau is designed to be a physical infrastructure that locks that position in, a logistics hub, a financial center, a manufacturing base, all at the intersection of east-west and north-south trade flows. Alatau could represent Kazakhstan's post-oil, post-Russian dependence economic identity.
Бұл қала елімізде және тұтас аймақта инновацияны, криптоиндустрия мен технологиялық кәсіпкерлікті дамытуға жол ашатын қуатты орталық қылуға тиіс.
The numbers are staggering. Kazakhstan expects Alatau to require roughly 10 trillion tenge, about $20.8 billion in investment by 2050. The government insists that the vast majority will come from private investors, not the state budget. Deputy Prime Minister Kanat Bozumbayev, the project's political champion, told Parliament the tax incentives would be offered exclusively to new investment projects in priority sectors with requirements for efficiency, environmental standards, and innovation. He explicitly denied that Alatau would function as an offshore zone.
Всем понятно, какие процессы в Дубае сейчас происходят. Многие страны хотят воспользоваться этим вопросом, то что президента переманивают. Но мы не собираемся офшорную зону строить.
Investors would receive preferences, but also obligations. Job creation targets, tax payments, and construction deadlines. The ambition extends to technology. Alatau is being developed as a smart city under the principle digital by default. Government services, infrastructure management, and urban planning will be built around artificial intelligence from the start.
Алатау Сити станет первым полностью цифровым городом, где инфраструктура, городские сервисы и экономика интегрированы на основе больших данных.
Bozembayev announced that testing of air taxis between Almaty and Alatau would begin this year, with public operations expected within 2 or 3 years. Flight time, 10 to 15 minutes.
Грубо говоря, турист прилетел в аэропорт, улетел на Медео, улетел в любую точку горного кластера, улетел на побережье Капшагая. Представьте, что эти аэротакси летают со скоростью около 300-350 км в час. И между вот этими тремя Алматинской областью, Алатау и Алматы на первом этапе в ближайшие 2-3 года это будет 10-15 минут занимать по воздуху.
The extension of Almaty's metro, the Green Line, is planned to eventually connect the two cities. The centerpiece of the skyline will be the iconic towers, with the tallest reaching 272 meters, 56 floors. Renderings of the business district look like something from science fiction. The tourism and marina areas recall Dubai or Singapore. Now, here's what you need to pay attention to: the gap between vision and execution. The constitutional law includes investor protections, a prohibition on discriminatory treatment, access to international arbitration, and a ban on withdrawing funds from Alatau's budget into the national budget until 2050 or until the city achieves fiscal self-sufficiency. That's designed to signal one thing to foreign capital: this is serious and your money is protected. But signal and reality are two different things. And the reality on the ground tells a much more complicated story. Despite the trillion tenge projections and futuristic renderings, the current state of Alatau is sobering. The territory consists of several villages where most of the working population commutes daily to Almaty. Not all areas have centralized water supply or sewage systems. Road and social infrastructure are underdeveloped. And then there's the land problem. Of the 88,000 hectares designated for the city, approximately 40%, 37,000 hectares, is already privately owned. Another 27,000 to 28,000 hectares are under long-term agricultural leases. About 10,000 hectares belong to the military, security services, and airports. What remains is roughly 14,000 hectares of marginal land. Bozembayev told journalists the government is negotiating with landholders, offering equivalent plots elsewhere, market rate buyouts, or, if necessary, court-ordered transfers. Land tax rates for unproductive plots will increase tenfold in 2 years and 15-fold in 3. Translation: for at least 2 years, getting land for a new investment project in Alatau is going to be extremely difficult. And for investors deciding whether to commit hundreds of millions of dollars, that kind of uncertainty is precisely what kills projects. The city's approved budget for 2026 through 2028 is approximately 12 billion tenge per year, with only 3 to 4 billion in transfers from regional budget. To put that in perspective, a single standard school under Kazakhstan's Comfortable School program costs 10.3 billion tenge. 1 kilometer of basic asphalt road costs 500 million tenge. The budget for an entire city designed to house 2 million people is roughly enough to build 1 school per year. The factories coming in so far: Mars Pet Care, PepsiCo, manufacturers of corrugated paper, concrete, and batteries, can provide jobs for tens of thousands at most. A city of 2 million needs an economic base orders of magnitude larger. Here's the number that should haunt every planner involved in the project. When Deputy Prime Minister Bozembayev presented the constitutional law to Parliament, he openly admitted that 60% of comparable planned city projects around the world have failed. Songdo in South Korea, one of the models Kazakhstan studied, is frequently cited by global urbanists as a cautionary tale. The city was built, half the projected population never showed up. Housing was too expensive. Cultural and social infrastructure was missing.
At Masdar City, we make your sustainable choices, well, much easier.
Masdar City in the UAE, Forest City in Malaysia, hundreds of planned cities around the world that promised everything and delivered empty streets. The pattern is consistent. Construction takes too long, economic conditions shift, investor priorities change, and the city that was supposed to attract millions attracts nobody. Despite these risks, dismissing Alatau as empty ambition would be a mistake because the strategic logic behind the project is real. Kazakhstan has spent the last 3 decades navigating between Russia and China, what President Tokayev has called the country's multi-vector policy. That policy depends on Kazakhstan having economic value independent of its oil reserves and independent of its relationships with Moscow and Beijing.
Гибкие логистические решения, стабильность поставок, скорость прохождения грузов позволит существенно нарастить объемы транзитных потоков в Евразийский экономический союз.
The Middle Corridor provides exactly that. As European sanctions on Russia have made the northern transit routes through Russian territory increasingly problematic, demand for the Central Asian alternative has surged. Cargo volumes on the Middle Corridor have been growing rapidly, and every major European and Asian logistics company is looking at Kazakhstan as a key node. Alatau's location is not accidental. It sits on the main road between Almaty and Tokayev, near existing rail infrastructure and within reach of Kazakhstan's western border. The planned airport and railway junctions are designed to make it a transit and processing hub, not just a residential city, but a logistics engine. There's also a domestic political dimension that's easy to overlook. Kazakhstan already has experience turning a small town into a major city.
Сегодня нами движут серьезные экономические соображения, желание иметь город, который изначально можно отстраивать как столицу независимого государства.
30 years ago, President Nursultan Nazarbayev moved the capital from Almaty to a small northern town, eventually renamed Astana. The move was widely mocked at the time. Today, Astana is a modern capital city. But that move wasn't just about urban planning. As we've discussed on this channel, moving the capital north was a strategic response to Russian separatist pressure, bringing ethnic Kazakh populations into a region that was a majority Russian region, anchoring sovereignty through demographics and institutions. Alatau serves a different but parallel function. It's designed to anchor Kazakhstan's economic sovereignty, creating a physical infrastructure for an economic model that doesn't depend on Russian transit, Russian energy partnerships, or Russian financial systems. If Astana was about preventing territorial loss, Alatau is about preventing economic capture. President Tokayev has personally championed the project, publicly criticizing Kazakhstan's national bank and financial regulators for raising too many objections to the special status law. His message to the bureaucracy has been blunt. Kazakhstan has debated this project for 20 years. It's time to act. The original concept was proposed in 2006 by oligarch Yuri Tskai. It was shelved in 2008, revived in 2009, shelved again, revived again, declared environmentally harmful, revived once more, and nearly launched with a Singaporean investor in 2021, and finally given a name and a map in 2024. That two-decade cycle of indecision is itself a risk factor. But it also suggests the forces pushing for the project, the presidential administration, the deputy prime minister, and the logistics and investment communities have decided that the window for action is now and may not stay open. So where does this leave us? Alatau is a high-stakes bet. The vision is compelling. The strategic logic is sound. But the execution risks are enormous, and the government's own officials admit that the majority of comparable projects worldwide have failed. Here's what I think we should watch. First, whether the land problem gets resolved quickly enough to attract the anchor investors the project needs. Without large-scale foreign capital commitments in the next 2 or 3 years, the momentum will stall. Second, whether the infrastructure gap closes fast enough. A city budget that can barely build one school a year is not going to create the conditions that attract 2 million residents. Private investment has to fill that gap, and private investors need to see results before they commit. Third, whether the special legal and tax regime actually functions as designed, or whether Kazakhstan's bureaucratic and judicial systems undermine the protections on paper. Investor confidence depends on enforcement, not just legislation. Fourth, whether the Middle Corridor itself continues to grow. Alatau's entire rationale depends on Central Asia's increasing importance as a transit hub. If geopolitical conditions shift, if Russia-Europe relations normalize, if alternative routes emerge, the demand that justifies this city could weaken. And fifth, whether Alatau avoids the ghost city trap. The world is full of planned cities that were built but never lived in. The difference between success and failure almost always comes down to one thing: whether there are enough jobs to justify the population the city was designed for. Bozanbayev told journalists he has a personal vision for scaling the Alatau model to other regions of Kazakhstan, but declined to share the details. He said the plan is simple: build Alatau first, learn from the results, positive and negative, and then apply those lessons elsewhere. That's an honest answer, and honesty about the risks may be the most important thing distinguishing this project from the dozens of failed planned cities that were sold on optimism alone.
Kazakhstan approaches today's turbulent world with a spirit of constructive engagement. Our foreign policy is based on the belief
that dialogue is more powerful than division, and that sovereign rights must be respected.
Kazakhstan is a country that spent its entire independent existence balancing between great powers, Russia, China, the West. That balancing act has kept Kazakhstan sovereign, but sovereignty requires more than diplomacy. It requires an economic foundation that can't be captured, redirected, or cut off by a hostile neighbor. Alatau is Kazakhstan's attempt to build that foundation, literally from the ground up. A city on the middle corridor, designed to anchor the country's role in a trade network that doesn't run through Moscow. Whether it works depends on execution, investment, and political will sustained over decades. The odds, by the government's own admission, are not in its favor. But the alternative, doing nothing while the trade routes of the future are built around you, may be worse. For a deeper dive into Kazakhstan's geopolitical positioning, check out our earlier analysis on whether Kazakhstan could become the next Ukraine. And let me know in the comments, do you think Alatau will become a thriving hub or another ghost city?